Hey guys, it's Will from Tested.
Adam from Tested.
And it's Norm. So we promised you guys a more in-depth look at the building, the design, and the construction of the Shining Overlook Maze. There's a whole separate video with lots of visuals of the actual maze that we have on the site. Watch that first, but this is kind of a complimentary piece that we're going to walk through the entire build.
It was basically too big a build to do as a one-day build video because you spent 50, 60, 80 hours over 3 weeks.
Somewhere under 60 hours over 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, that's a lot of time.
It's a lot of concentrated time. I've never had a build I could spend so much time on. And I screwed up a lot, and it's all... I want to talk about it all. Yeah, it's all documented.
So even though we didn't shoot a one-day build, you were shooting time lapses and there's lots of still pictures and all that. So we're going to put them over top of this so you can watch, listen. It's just going to be on YouTube. It's not going to be a podcast.
And actually, in addition to this, later on in February, we're going to publish my Evernote document with the entire build. So measurements, everything goes in there. If you want to make your own Shining Maze, this is exactly how to do it.
Yeah.
I want to make my own Shining
And by the
Maze.
way, if somebody does, I would love to see that shite. That would be awesome.
Okay.
Let's start with reference.
Okay, reference was, as I started to look through the movie, I noticed that there were multiple mazes. The first one you see is Wendy and Danny are walking through the park. You see them passing by the maze. This was actually shot, what was built was exactly what you see on the outside.
So this was a live set built on a stage someplace or outside?
Built at L Street, right next to the fake Overlook Hotel facade that they had built.
Okay.
And they used both the maze and the hotel in both summer and winter footage. There is a map kiosk that they passed by. This is important because that map is the accurate map of what the maze actually is.
Okay, so then there was also an interior model of the maze.
Well, hold on, I'm getting to that. So then the next time you see the maze, Jack looks over the maze in the Overlook Hotel, and then you see from his point of view a zoom in on Wendy and Danny walking around the maze. And if you notice, this is kind of the maze in Jack's head. It's bilaterally symmetrical in both the X and Y axis.
And also much bigger.
And much bigger.
And more complex.
And this was shot as a pair of plates from a hotel balcony. They built a large-scale model of this, a large model of the maze, much bigger than the one that Jack looks over in the hotel, and to a different design, which is interesting. And then they matched that to some footage they shot of Shelley Duvall and Danny.
Okay.
Then there's the maze that the whole finale of the movie takes place in. This is actually the same maze that Wendy and Danny walk through.
In the beginning.
In the beginning, except that when they walked through it, it was built on an MGM lot. They transferred it to the indoor shooting stage at Elstree for this. All of this finale in the wintertime was shot indoors.
Wow. So and then you had said that they fogged up the whole room so that you couldn't see their breath in the.
Well, they fogged up the whole room.
You did not see their breath.
Yeah, you couldn't see their breath.
So for that shot, is that an actual maze? Is there actually a path?
Well, here is the path that they walked on. So this is what they built for both the summer and winter finale maze. It's not the full maze. It's only about a quarter of it, but that's enough to get all the shots that they need.
If you want to do a shot-by-shot recreation from a first-person perspective,
you'd have to build
that's
this
what
one.
you would build.
And this doesn't equate to the map at the kiosk.
And so some of this reference came from film stills, some of it came from the Kubrick exhibit, some of it came from...
and actually, Lee Unkrich, who's the director of Toy Story 3, is also the proprietor of the overlookhotel.com.
Okay.
Let me just double-check that. The overlookhotel.com, yes. And he has tremendous amounts of fantastic information, and he passed on some of this information to me to help me make my maze extra, extra accurate.
Okay.
That's the maze that I'm replicating. There's Jack in the Colorado room looking over this architectural model. I first determined that it was in 1/50th scale.
And how did you do that? By looking at the lamps and stuff?
Actually, yeah, I looked at the lamps, I extrapolated various heights and distances, and then I came to a sort of... My measurements said it was somewhere between 1/45th and 1/55th scale, which is great because, hold on, which was fantastic because 1/50th scale is actually O scale, the prime medium train scale.
Right. The little trains that you had, the boxcars are what, like 3 or 4 inches long?
Yeah, and given that you can see figures and lamps around this model, that's exactly what the model makers in England would have chosen, 1/50th scale.
Right.
So then it was up to me to draw in full scale the map, and I did this at my dining room table. I have a time lapse of this.
And this is based on the kiosk.
The kiosk map, yes. And it's tricky. It's a little bit tricky. Obviously, the rows are bigger than the hedges, which means that it is an alternating grid of large and small squares.
You mean the white space, the place where you walk is narrower than the hedge. The hedges aren't the same width as
the hedges
paths.
are narrower than the walking space.
And even at the center, there's some alignment where the center could have been also not match that grid.
Exactly. And there are some places where hedges are where rows should be and vice versa. And I had to kind of suss all this out. And the only way to do it was drawing it full scale.
And on the reference map, is it drawn to scale?
It is mostly drawn to scale. Yes, I followed the scale of the reference map in terms of the exterior dimensions.
Okay.
And the relationship between the length and the width. But then once I was inside, I had to adjust a couple of little things here and there.
And this was one of the first places you made a mistake, right? You had to redo a quadrant of this?
Yeah, on the entrance side, I had to jog everything one hedge width in order to get things to align the way they ought to have. It's just a little bit of a brain bender, and it's boring to go over it now, but when I publish this, you'll be able to see what I was talking about. Next thing was to start problem solving. So I quickly mocked together a bit of hedge that was of medium complexity to see the order in which I would do stuff. I needed to flock all this. I was going to use train flocking, which is a sort of a fine green powder for making grass and hedges.
For model train sets.
Yeah, and I was going to apply it with some glue. But I wanted to make sure it was robust. I wanted to test my methodologies. Would I flock before construction or during or after? All of these questions had to be answered. So here's me adding the flocking, which looks great, and then subjecting it to some abuse, which is not great.
Meaning just handling it,
Handling
basically.
it and tossing it around. Because, I'm going to be moving these parts around a lot. I can't be repairing it all the time.
So at this point, you were thinking, could I assemble a curve, a corner, and still flock it and get full coverage?
Right.
Or do you have to flock each individual piece before connecting them?
And in the end, I sort of determined to flock each individual piece, and then later on, I abandoned that when it took way too much time.
Yeah.
And so this is something, like 90 board feet of maze?
The total maze is 90 board feet.
That is
92,
a lot of
I think.
three-side
So
flocking.
your process of flocking, you have a list here.
Yes, I paint MDF hedges with a coat of green spray paint, apply white glue on the entirety except the bottom.
like Elmer's or
I used an
acid-free?
archival white glue. Flock the hedge, let it dry, apply clear coat, and then apply a last coat of green paint. And the clear coat and the green spray paint as a final overcoat end up really helping tie all the flocking together so it's much more robust.
And you use two different colors of spray paint, right, to give it a little bit of a model?
I did. As Lee Unkrich pointed out to me when he was here visiting, the model actually in a couple of the shots, you can see that it's sort of mottled. It is not it's not a consistent single mono color. And so I used two different colors of spray paint. And these will be in the Evernote document, which colors I chose.
And the paint that you're using is something that was new too, right?
Yeah,
You
it's
wanna
this
talk about that?
fantastic spray paint from Plaque that puts out a super high saturated color. It's great. I really am happy with
One
the spray
coat
paint.
for a lot of stuff that you were thinking. I know you were pleasantly surprised.
And the undercoat was a great way to do what we call in special effects hiding the crimes.
Did you consider other materials aside from MDF, a foam, perhaps?
I did in the beginning. I thought I would do this out of foam sponge, and I actually ordered a bunch of filter sponge.
Like the wide mesh filter.
And there's all these different grades, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, right? And so I ordered some medium grade, like 40, and then I realized I don't have any idea how I'd be putting all this stuff together, joining these angles and then flocking sponge is much harder.
Gluing the sponge in the right angle and all that stuff. Oh.
I mean, I believe that they made their model using probably styrofoam or urethane foam, which, again, I could knock that out very quickly using that, but it wouldn't be very durable. And as we've talked about before, this is going in the Kubrick exhibit. It's going to ship to 3 different countries in the next 2 years. It's got to be robust.
Yeah.
So now I'm starting to work on the outside of the hedge. The outer perimeter of the maze has columns all the way around it, 32, I believe. So I had to cut 1-inch thick MDF in a sort of a wide L shape. And here's all my cut pieces. Here's all the arches, which were, again, stacked, clamped, and cut as one on the bandsaw.
So that way your arches match across. Man, that's some precise cutting on the bandsaw.
It is, and luckily, it's with something like that, you want to go get a nice sharp blade so that the blade doesn't wander. It's moving material at the rate you want it to. It's easy to try and gang this stuff up to save time and only have like a dull blade wander, and you've lost a whole bunch of time because you have to do it again.
Why the bandsaw, not the scroll saw?
Just the bandsaw is better able to take large stacks of material like that than the scroll saw. The other thing is that the maze has 4 sides, and 3 of them have different spacing of the columns.
Wow.
Oh,
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So the long sides are equivalent to each other, but the 2 short sides are different from each other and from the long side. So all those measurements had to be worked out.
Oh, right, because the one side has to accommodate the door in the middle,
Yeah.
and the other side, yeah, okay.
So here you can see the rough wood parts being brought together. There's 80% of the front hedge done.
So did you cut the arches out of just thinner 1/8 plywood or something?
Yeah, I cut them
Okay.
out exactly.
Okay,
Precisely.
So then they glued onto the faces, and you had your arches built in. That's
I
neat.
hot glued them all together.
Wow.
Yeah. With wood, hot glue loves wood.
Right.
Forever it does. So here's me thinking I'm going to flock everything at once. I've got like 60 feet of just the MDF here, pre-painted, and there are some straight pieces of hedge that are just a length of hedge that doesn't join anything else. So I separated out all those and thought I'd start with those to kind of work out my methodologies. And here is the pre-coating on the outer perimeter and the center. A little dude I put there.
That's the center. Yep.
Oh, also, there are crowns on the top of each column. I cut the crowns very specifically by using the table saw to cut a knife edge in MDF, then cut those into 1-inch squares, which I turned 90 degrees. These pictures will make this all clear what I'm talking about. Clamp those between 2 boards and recut it again on the table saw at the same angle.
Wow.
That's
later on-
efficiency to get a perfect pyramid.
Except that later on, you'll see Lee Unkrich, who was a great arbiter of accuracy, and he's just as obsessive as I am, pointed out that my hedge crowns weren't accurate. So I actually had to go back and redo this.
They were not quite pointy enough.
They were not pointy enough.
Oh.
Here's me doing the first flocking.
How did you do the corners? Did you do square corners? Did you do 45
I
degrees?
did mitered corners. On the outer perimeter, that was a really great way to minimize any details that would show where it joined, because it'd be easy to fill that little mitered edge.
Right.
And I also mitered all of the corners inside the maze, which if I had to do this again, I would not do.
Did you just use flush
I would
square?
just use flush square. I thought it'd be easier to dress if you saw any of the joints. Later on, I developed a methodology for hiding the joints that was so good, I could have done butt joints.
But you didn't know that until
I didn't know that.
But you could have theoretically done a couple of practice runs.
I ended up losing a bunch of time with the mitered corners because it's hard to staple them perfectly 90 degrees square. It's just difficult.
Well, and if you had done square corners, then you could put them on the grinder and
Exactly.
disc sand them down,
and
disc sand your crimes away.
Exactly. Here's every time I see pictures of me working, I think, oh my God, your posture's terrible.
Well, it's not like you're hunched over a tiny 50th scale maze or anything like that.
Flocking, that's the most time-consuming part.
It really was. A couple of dozen hours of flocking. Here I'm using my old yellow blow dryer to dry the flocking. In fact, I built a little triangular tent out of wood that I had the blow dryer sticking in as a little makeshift oven. It was about 115 degrees in there, which is great for drying glue and
For white glue,
really
right?
fast. Yeah. There we go. Things are starting to take shape. The outer perimeter is mostly done.
So on this one, as you were doing this, we're starting to see completed pieces here.
Yeah.
Was there temptation to go in and just start tacking it down?
No, there wasn't. It's always about how I can build momentum for my excitement, right? In the middle of all this tedious work, you've got to do stuff to get yourself excited. So that's why I assemble things and oh, look, there's the center all together.
The work is starting to pay off.
Right. And I get to, it's, the goal is in sight. And then it's not in sight because you have dozens more hours to go. Throughout all of this, I'm constantly thinking, what will the tack down process be? I didn't want to glue it. I wanted to pre-drill and use screws on the whole
You didn't
thing.
glue anything on
I
this
didn't glue
to
anything.
speak of.
It's
Yeah.
all well, white glue and hot glue for the detail pieces.
Right.
But the hedges are all actually screwed to the base. And that was like, what was I going to do? Am I going to draw the whole map on the base and send? No, actually, maybe I'll lay them down and position them to each other. Throughout this whole process, I'm sort of getting that going in my head, what that thing's going to be. And I know that I've got time to work it out. So I'm running through scenarios and seeing where they might fail and how they might screw me. In the middle, I found the plucking so mind-numbing, I took a break for a day and upholstered the captain's chair for my Captain Kirk's captain's chair. So here's a bunch of photos of that. Then I cut the main board that will be the base, laid my map on it to take a look at it, and started to, this is just the center and the perimeter placed in place.
Those are fixed, or not fixed in, but those things are the things that will be the guide.
Yes, I will tack these down first or decide upon their position first, and then I will position everything else to those.
Relative to
It's
that.
so funny. We looked at the bottom of that board, and you reused a prop from
I did.
a Mythbusters episode.
We did the Simpsons episode, which was our season premiere this year. There's a shot of I will not throw cherry bombs in the toilet, a blackboard. I grabbed that piece of wood out of M5 and used that as the base. So underside, you can see it's a Mythbusters prop.
Painted like a chalkboard.
All right, so here I am actually starting to take some of my completed flocked pieces and just placing them. Nothing is tacked down in this picture. Everything's just placed for visuals to kind of see how it's going, give myself an idea of how much I've got to go, and also to give myself energy to continue.
How did you keep track of which piece was which on this?
Everything
Were you
is
labeling
labeled
them?
on the underside, and every label is then transferred over to the map. So I can pick up something and go, which is number 26? Okay, 26 is over here.
Okay.
It's a lot of keeping track.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really easy to lose track of that stuff
Yes.
if you weren't really on top of it.
Now, I was planning on flocking everything before putting it down, and then I realized, actually, I need more energy. It was taking so long and going so slow. I decided to start completing the hedges and placing them in with the pre-finished flocked hedges just to kind of get everything laid down. And here is all the maze constructed, but not yet only 40% flocked. This allowed me to spend, it took about an hour of just goosing everything to everything else, pulling parts out, making them square. I remade about a half dozen pieces in here to kind of get everything relative to each other.
You move half a centimeter in any direction, and everything gets shifted.
I mean, if you started tacking this down from one side to the other, the introduced errors you could end up with would just ruin your whole month.
What's the how much of this did you end up redoing at any given time?
Yeah, like I said, I rebuilt about a half dozen of these on this day where I was laying this stuff down. After that, I didn't have to do much more rebuilding.
You're pretty happy with how it worked out.
You could see I still haven't replaced the hedge crowns in this shot yet. But after adjusting everything for about an hour, and I have a time lapse of that too, I went in and pulled off the outside and began tracing everything's position and labeling it with the label on the underside of the hedge. And these were to be the final positions.
Okay.
So I took a lot of, I went around this probably 20 times, looking at it, adjusting, tweaking, just to make sure everything was kind of relative to each other correctly.
So you didn't have to draw the map out on the board again.
No.
You placed it, got it looking like the map, and then that seems a lot less tedious than going the other way.
There's another shot of all the stuff laid down. Here's the new hedge crowns.
Much pointier.
Yeah, much pointier, and they're also getting pinned and chamfered and painted and flocked. It looks like a nice little forest. And here is the board with all the positions
there it
traced,
goes.
all the screw holes labeled, because that's where I was going to pilot drill from the top, countersink from the bottom, and then lay each hedge in, pilot drill it, and then pop it in with screws.
Did you ever hit? It seems like the point that you hit the wall and were like, oh God, I don't think I can do this, was when you were midway through building the hedges and midway through the flocking. And just like,
that's where it just got so tedious. I couldn't see the end, and I was like, I got to go build a captain's chair.
well, and the waiting for the glue to dry and the paint to dry just will kill you.
Yeah, it totally will. And I did 95% of this alone. Frank Ippolito helped with a few hedges. My son Thing 2 and Thing 1 both helped with about half dozen hedges. And actually, those guys help while small was really critical in pushing me past a certain point. It was really nice to have someone else doing flocking while I could concentrate and things were still going.
and
Productivity multiplies.
Yes, it really does.
And I mean, there's a social aspect that helps too. Like when I built some shelves for my daughter that were a similar like 94 feet of shelves for about 10 board feet of actual shelf space.
Right.
And I got about halfway through that. I was like, this is insane. I am wasting it. It's an incredibly, like, this is really overly complicated and I'm making it much harder than it needs to be.
And when you're building something, managing, like, I know that I have this reputation of being gung-ho, crazy fast, and like super sort of sloppy about my builds. And those are true things, except that I also really can get into tedious work. But when you're working alone on tedious stuff, you need to manage your energy and your enthusiasm. And that's what I mean. That's why I kept doing the assemblies, because when I see it all laid out, I get excited. And that makes me want to jump back into the team.
And I mean, I have to imagine the way you normally build stuff like this, where you do an hour a day for 3 years, you don't have to worry about that as much because the tendency to lock yourself in the shop.
Actually, on the contrary,
Really?
you can get stuck in the middle of like flocking and put the thing away and not touch it for a year.
Well, that's true.
That's where, it becomes really critical to kind of get yourself to a certain point, maybe choose an arbitrary deadline. Here is everything flocked. Now, this is just sitting on my pool table. This is actually sitting on the pool table so that I can apply the final paint job to all the flocking and kind of bring it into a
The
uniform.
pool table was covered.
The pool table was covered with a tarp, yes. And this, I took the two colors and sort of went all around to camouflage this, as it were, and bring it all into a kind of uniformity, because some of the stuff was getting dusty for 2 weeks before the other stuff was painted, and that was changing the color values. This to kind of bring it all in, because I wouldn't be able to do any more spray painting once it was on the baseboard.
Right, because the board you're just leaving unpainted MDF, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now here is the baseboard, labeled, pre-drilled, countersunk on the underside, ready. And you were here that day, Will. This is everything tacked down. It took me so much faster to do all the pilot drilling and screwing than I thought it would.
It took longer for you to pick the people out, I think.
Yeah.
And I was doing a little bit of like soldering resistors on street lamps, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I mean, like this went really fast.
It's 40 minutes from start to finish of like actually tacking down all the final
It seemed
pieces.
like you'd already placed them on the board. Like you'd already marked where they were going to go, or at least knew where they were going to go.
I had. Yeah. And my fidelity was I had to follow those marks exactly. I didn't want a drill to come up through the flocking or anything like that.
Right.
It's kind of like what it would look like if you got it as a model kit.
Right. So one of the details in the model in the Colorado room in the movie is that it has this wide chamfered border, this kind of wooden frame. My next door neighbor Bobby is a fine carpenter and cabinet builder.
What an amazing coincidence!
I know, and so for a very reasonable trade, he cut the board feet of poplar for me for the outer frame.
Wow.
Now the underside here, you can see it's there's a chamfer in there. Is that a chamfer?
No, it's just a channel.
It's a channel. My apologies.
You've got all appled up over here.
Channel. There's a channel, and that channel is actually for the street lights, and you'll see that later. There's my street lights I bought on Alibaba for about $1 a piece, which is great because on normal train sites they're like $9 a piece.
And this was and there's what, 30 of them, I think. 28?
Yeah, something like 32. I can't quite remember. It's all a blur. Here is the maze assembled on the pool table. This was actually for the Comic-Con, Sketchfest opening night party after Woodstock. And you can see that there's a white styrene construction. That's one of the news kiosks, as yet unbuilt.
So the beautiful thing about doing O scale is that you were able to leverage all of the world of train people, and like all that stuff was established. So you didn't have to go out and make 32 little street lamps, because that would have been really hard.
Prohibitive. I would have not put street lamps in.
You did make the benches, though.
I did make the benches out of styrene, and I gang built those. You can score styrene and then break it.
Yeah.
And so I made all.
You did those while I was sitting
28
here too.
benches, 22 benches. I made all those in about half an hour and glued them up and then sanded them. And then every figure and every piece and every bench is actually pinned to the ground as well as being glued with stainless steel wire.
So you drill a little hole up into whatever appendage was convenient.
030. Yeah,
30 thousandths?
drill.
Yeah, it's a tiny little bit.
Yeah, tiny little drill. And then socked in, and then the figures were all pinned to the benches so that they wouldn't go. And this is my son, thing one, making a New Yorker cover. Guy sitting reading. Here is me experimenting with a repair technique. Because I'm sending this with a repair kit. This is using a paste made of some white glue, some spray paint, the flocking, and applying it like a spackle and then dressing it out with a little acid brush. Worked beautifully to hide some of my joints and to dress the corners.
And any of the places that the board showed through underneath as well.
Clever thing you did was also you put some 2x4s or some wood beneath the model so you can lift.
Yeah, so I have the model sitting off any table you'll put it on by an inch, so you can easily get your fingers under it. Here is the news kiosk unpainted. Now, let's go over to this file here. Once I had it to that point, I made the news kiosk, and then I also made the map kiosk, only to realize that I'd scaled them off the wrong dude.
Oh, no.
There's a little newsman standing next to the kiosk, and I thought it was an adult, but it wasn't. It was a kid.
It was a paper boy, not a paper man?
And when I finally built these, I was like, these aren't big enough. This picture, and then I realized, so I had to rebuild them. So here is my styrene drawing on 080 styrene for 040 for rebuilding the news kiosk. There's the first two parts. There's the window frame coming into view.
A lot of the frames, a lot of detail.
Yeah, man. And here's the map kiosk.
How'd you do is the roof a pre-made piece or
the
is
roof
that
is vacuum formed? Wood. What do you call
shingles?
That? Shingles,
so like
roof.
cedar shakes.
You can buy sheets of this in O scale from model train.
That's
sites.
awesome. And then you just painted it.
Yeah. And so here's the two wrong ones. Two wrongs did make a right in this case. Now, that channel underneath the frame, I laid copper tape that I cut into thin strips there, and that is for wiring up the street lamps. And it took solder beautifully. I was able to solder the joints. So it's effectively a wire run.
So you drilled a hole through for the lamp to mount in, dropped the wires down, one went to one side, one went to the other, and they all light up.
Exactly.
Nice.
Here is the finished kiosk, news kiosk with a guy sitting in front of it. There's an Easter egg. There's an Easter egg back behind there. If you look inside, it looks like magazines, but it's something special. You're just going to go have to
we're just going to keep going.
Yeah. I had lots of fun. Oh, here is just like one of my drawings for where benches go. There's so many details of this to make lists and figure out where everything goes. You can't just count it up. You have to really diagram it out and see.
And if you don't write it down, it didn't happen, right? Because if you don't write it down, you're never going to remember when you need to remember.
Exactly. Now, again, this thing is shipping out, so I had to make a metal frame. I didn't have to, but I decided to weld a metal frame that I painted bright orange that bolts to the maze. And when the craters build the crate around it, that frame will help super protect this maze and keep it from being damaged in transit.
So it bolts through the MDF that the maze is actually stuck on.
I actually captured T-nuts onto the underside of the maze so this thing can be really bolted together. Here's the first of the streetlights being drilled into the frame.
How long did the streetlights take all told? You said that went pretty fast.
It went pretty fast. About an hour and 15 minutes to lay out all the streetlights and wire them from underneath.
So you were laying underneath to do the soldering? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you do any finishing on the poplar?
Yes, I actually I sanded it. And then I thought about applying a light stain, but I decided against it. I just used a straight spar varnish on it, which I let dry, and then I sanded that again. I wanted it to look kind of handmade rather than like super trick.
Okay.
Now here is the maze pre-frame, exterior frame, but with my steel frame in place just to test placement. And you can see how well this will protect the maze.
The thing I love about this steel frame is that the thing that I would have done is dangled a bolt down the bottom, put a nut on the top so that it would lock it in place and a washer. And then I would have had to crawl underneath to bolt it in, put the nut on from the underneath. But because you put those captured nuts in there, you just drop the bolts down, hit your ratchet, and it's on.
Yep.
I mean, that's awesome.
I'm thinking about the people that are going to be opening this. And if I make their job difficult where they're opening it, and I don't know who they are, they're different people every time possibly. If I make it difficult, I'm going to suffer. because I've got to think through what it's going to be like to receive this. So my metal frame also has these two handles on it. That's for actually lifting the maze.
It's a real easy
comfortably
lift.
and moving it. So
two people can do it.
It
no
weighs
problem.
about 60 pounds. It's a very heavy object. I needed to consider the backs and the strength of the people also putting this in.
Well, and as Norm said, because you put the feet on the bottom, even if you lay it flat on the ground, you'll still be able to reach your hands underneath easily and lift it up without worries about dropping. I thought that was this is a nice touch.
All right, so there's close-up of the copper beings. There's the soldered wires from the street lights. There's the street lights in the exterior frame all lit up.
So hold on, you lowered the maze back down in after you put
I
the
started
streetlights
trying
on?
to lower the maze back down in, but it was too close tolerance, and I broke one of my streetlights doing it. So instead, I put the orange frame back on the maze, turned the maze upside down, laid it down on a workbench, and lowered the frame onto the maze upside down.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. It was tricky as hell.
That was a good test, flipping it upside down.
It
Yeah,
is.
that's
And it
not
was
scary
great
at
that I
all.
built a metal frame because otherwise I would have destroyed like 3 or 4. So here is the pretty much completed maze sitting in the shop. Now, yeah, I love that shot. There's a plaque. This is something Lee Unkrich was completely critical in helping me find. He has some reference material that is totally incredible and it's never been seen. And it shows this reference material that on the backside of the maze is a plaque that says the Overlook Maze. What the copy is on it, we don't know.
It's unintelligible.
It's
from the picture.
unintelligible, but I matched this plaque. I bought some aluminized acrylic and we laser cut it. Norm and I laser cut it on my laser cutter. You see it? That's text is
beautiful.
lit
Yes,
up.
totally readable.
We did a laser raster etch to make this plaque, and this is just like I love this. Right there is. Nobody else in the world could have helped me figure out that plaque but Lee, and like we've become quite close in our obsession talking about this.
So,
maze.
but if you couldn't read the text, what is the text on? Is it just Lorem Ipsum?
No, it's text from a couple different scenes that didn't make the final edit of The Shining, but I utilized the text nonetheless.
Got it.
It still has a provenance back to Kubrick's typewriter.
Okay.
There we go, laid on the ground. And in all its glory, the three of us spent about, 2.5 hours
It was,
photographing this thing from every angle. And Norm, I have to say, your photographs are so fantastic and so the depth of field, the scale, the color. It's really exciting, and this is the end of my folder. But
we'll share those photos.
You guys
as
should
well.
show on this some of your photos because there's just some beautiful, beautiful stuff. This is actually I photoshopped in and added paper all the way
and took the seams out.
against.
Wow. So this is
Here's
Norm standing on the apple
taking one of
boxes.
his
Yeah.
shots.
But yeah, that's a 5-week project from start to finish. A very ambitious project, one of the more time-consuming things, and a sprint to the finish.
Yeah, real sprint. This is like we've said a couple of times so far. This is the first time I've ever had this much time to spend on something like this, and it is clear if I absolutely had to do this for hire, I could have turned this around in maybe just a little more than a week.
You're not taking commissions.
No, I am not
No.
taking commissions. I have no idea what to insure this thing for, but it's a lot.
But I mean, so now, you're going to post the maze, the plans for the maze.
Yeah.
Theoretically, somebody could make an Overlook Maze, probably not call it that, but like a hay bale maze or a corn maze or
They
whatever.
could. The Stanley Hotel, which is where Stephen King wrote The Shining, is asking people to suggest mazes. I say to the Stanley Hotel, use this design.
Yeah, it's perfectly good.
It's already done.
How many paths? Did you figure it out?
There are 2 solutions to this maze.
There's a going left and a going right from the
I
entrance
found
one.
2 different solutions for making
Okay.
your way through the Overlook Maze.
Very cool.
Fantastic.
And there it is.
Your little people, I think you talked about it in the main video,
did.
but you
We
got
did.
the little people, they're kind of expensive.
They are about $5 a piece.
Wow.
So a bunch of dough spent on the little people, but they're like even their eyes, their pupils are painted with the finest brush I could possibly
They're
imagine.
lovely, yeah. It's a gorgeous project. If people want to see it, it's going to be in Mexico City for the next few months.
It's going to be in Mexico City, and then it goes somewhere else. We'll put this up on the site. I can't remember where, but it's somewhere in Europe. And then at the end of 2016, it comes back here to San Francisco.
And that's the end of the traveling
I
Kubrick
believe
exhibit,
that's
right?
the last thing on the lender's agreement. It might, you never know with these things. Maybe they could end up going to another place.
Or
But right
back
now,
to
that's as
Lakshman or
far in the
something like that.
future as
Okay.
we've planned. planned.
Wow.
Great.
It's a gorgeous piece of work. The movers just came to pack it up.
Yep.
They're going to build a shipping crate around it. I think that's as good a place as any to sign off.
Yeah.
But if you have questions, post them in the comments. We'll round up the best
try
ones.
to
We'll talk
answer
about
them.
them still entitled or in the comments themselves.
All right, guys.
So anyway, thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.